All right, everyone, welcome back to the Accessible and Inclusive Design Conference. I am not Lewis, as you can tell by the sound of my voice. And if you see my photo here, I'm Nicole Latwell helping out today and hosting. I'm very excited to be here with Deborah Harris. So let me do some introductions and then turn it over to her. Deborah is a dynamic and passionate facilitator renowned for her innovative approach to learning. As the visionary founder of ICU Learning, established in 2023, she leverages over 16 years of diverse experience in learning and development. Deborah's unwavering dedication to creating holistic, intentional, and immersive learning environments ensures that every individual feels understood, seen, and valued. What a wonderful bio. All right, Deborah, thanks so much. I'm so excited you're here. I'll turn it over.
Nicole, thank you so much for the introduction. Really appreciate it. And I'm super excited to be here with everyone today. She had introduced me, but I also want to give a more descriptive self-description. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And yes, my name is Deborah Harris. And for anyone joining by audio or not viewing the screen, here's a brief self-description. I identify as a caramel Caribbean American woman with dark brown eyes, brown hair tipped with some highlights, some blonde highlights, and I'm currently wearing some clear framed glasses. Now, I also have a white long sleeve shirt. Doesn't really match with the weather outside, but it's raining on my end. Not sure about all of you, and I have minimal makeup on. Whether you're joining by screen or audio or with the screen reader, you're welcome and invited to participate in whatever way works best for you. So before we jump in, you will notice on my screen, if you do have the screen open, that the theme of my slides has like a detective investigative theme to it with some yellow sticky notes. This is to play off the investigative approach that I am going to be suggesting we take when designing culturally inclusive content. And so the title of my session today is Breaking the Cultural Default in Learning Design. Now, I want to share why I chose this topic, okay? Because it was kind of selfish. I'm not even gonna lie. This is my third year speaking at the AIDC, and Lewis always creates this amazing space where we all get to share and learn different things about how to be more inclusive, more accessible, and especially in our learning design practices. So I was like, what do I want to talk about this year? And I hope Lewis welcomes this new topic. And so I'm currently consulting at a global company, like as we speak. And in my 17 years in learning and development, I started to uncover some of my own cultural defaults. And they started to surface at this company, like currently. And sometimes it was obvious, sometimes it was subtle, but it was showing up in my work. And I got very politely re, uh, recourse, I guess, or realigned, adjusted. They would give me some, tips and best practices, kind of course correct me along the way. And I was like, man, I am using phrases that I'm familiar with that not everybody else is familiar with. I'm assuming that how everybody receives and gives feedback is the same. I also was coming in with some preconceived ideas of what ideal participation is. So all of you are logging in, right? However you're logging in, but the assumption is that is that you're on your desktop. You may be on a phone device, you may be using screen readers, you may be logging in a large conference room on one screen and have no ability to type and engage in the chat. I don't know what that looks like. And so I would walk into some of my learning experience, like learning sessions with some of those assumptions. And I can't tell you how humbling that was. I'm like, man, I gotta break some of these habits. I'm a seasoned learning professional, 17 years in, and I'm learning new things. And so that's why I chose this topic, so I can share with you what I've been learning along the way these past few months. And I say few months, it's been 10 months now in my current contract, and I'm learning every day. So today, what I'm going to cover for all of you and with all of you is how to recognize some hidden cultural defaults. Sometimes we make some overlooked assumptions, and that shows up in our design work, in our curricula, right? So we're going to talk about that. And we're going to take an investigative, story-driven approach in doing so. And in plain sight, we're going to describe and define what cultural intelligence is. Most of us are familiar with IQ, right? And this will be really focused on CQ, cultural intelligence, and explain why cultural intelligence is essential for creating inclusive, effective learning experiences, especially in a global workplace. Then we're going to analyze some of those unexamined cultural norms. And I'm going to bring some of my own examples, and I'm hoping that you are willing to share some of your own experiences as well, so we can learn from each other. Um, so throughout this session, I'm hoping that you can reflect and share in the chat, but you're also welcome to just listen, whatever feels right for you. Along the way, I'm going to provide some tips on how we can apply an investigative mindset. And that's going to be tapping into what some of the regional demographics are. This was super new to me. So I'm going to introduce it to you. You may be familiar with these regional demographics, but if you're not, I'm excited to share those with you and find out how some mismatches may potentially happen when you're not aware of your audience. And then lastly, towards the end, we're going to wrap up by committing to how we're going to reflect on some of our own defaults and identify maybe some potential changes and adjustments we may make for upcoming projects. So, some hearts and some emojis if you're able to share, if you're excited to start this conversation. Nice. I see them. Thank you so much. I appreciate the sunny and the hands up, Brittany. Awesome. So let's start off. Thank you, James. I see all of you. Let's start off by defining what cultural intelligence is. So CQ, also known as cultural quotient, is the ability to understand, appreciate, and adapt to situations involving cultural diversity. All right. So imagine you're learning design as a scene from a mystery. What clues are you looking for? What clues are hiding in the background, right? And so when you start to investigate and look into some of the things we're going to talk about today, the idea is for you to use your cultural intelligence by recognizing, respecting, and flexing to those differences. And those differences can include nationality, it include age, ability, some cultural norms that you may have identified or communication styles. And it varies. It's going to go across the board here, right? Um, so one time I actually designed a course. And as you can see from my PowerPoint slide, I like to create things that are a little bit unorthodox. You know, sometimes the theme doesn't have anything to do with the topic itself, but I feel like it's captivating and it's going to capture people's attention. Well, what I have learned in designing is that when I start to use imagery, that imagery is not always culturally inclusive. Like, for example, I had pizza party images on a slide deck. And guess what? That was not normal to my Middle East audience. They were like, this isn't universal. I can't relate to these images. So I didn't recognize that until it was shared with me in a survey. And so getting that feedback in a survey won't necessarily be captured if we don't ask that question. So one tip that I would like to share before we dig deep is when you're seeking out feedback, this is a good way to find out if you were inclusive to your audience by capturing that data in a survey. Okay. So I'm going to ask you to type in the chat if you're able. Type CQ if you ever wished a course better reflected your world. Hmm. I see a whole lot of CQs coming in. You know, I'm going to ask you to share, right? Um, if you're willing, you can go ahead and type in the chat and then, put if you're typing in the chat, I'm assuming you're going to give me permission to share, and read it out loud for the rest of the audience. So Caitlin says, to be honest, as a white woman, courses usually do represent my world. I love that honesty, Caitlin. Thank you. How does that make you feel when you feel included in that way, Caitlin? Because that's still relevant, right? How you feel. Do you feel more engaged because it typically represents your world? Yeah, you said, I know that we should have a broader representation. Oh, I love that you pointed that out. So Caitlin in the chat says, of course, I feel more engaged, but then I am not challenged. Absolutely. And sometimes it's not even necessarily a challenge. I don't want you to just feel challenged, right? I want you to feel expanded. I want you to feel broadened. I want you to feel exposed to different cultures because that brings about some openness, right? R. Tucker says, as Caitlin said, when I feel unrepresented, it's about gender rather than ethnicity or culture. Yes, that's another space, right? Is including gender. There are some spaces that are very dominated by women. Right. So, of course, we will include images, maybe even examples that are representative of women, but maybe not the men in the room. All right. Kim's shared in the chat, I often don't connect with images, songs, memes, etc., since I'm an older worker. 70. Wow. First of all, yes. Wow. Yay for 70, Kim. And that is often not talked about is where is the generational diversity, right? In some of our imagery, in our representation. So that's an amazing example. And I love that you shared that. I have, it's flooding in now. We have Pankaj. I hope I said your name right. As a South Asian queer person, I sometimes feel that the use of imagery in the course is forced in an attempt to appear inclusive, even when it doesn't feel relevant or authentic. Oh, that is deep, Pankaj, because the relevancy is just as important. Sometimes when we change the image to feel like, oh, they can relate to this. This is an image we can use, but it doesn't necessarily have any relevancy to the topic itself or to the audience, right? And so it seems performative is what I'm hearing from you, Pankaj, is some performative inclusivity there. Jacoby shares, as a Black gay man, courses usually don't represent my world. And so notice Jacoby didn't talk about the images, he talked about the course itself, right? How specific are we getting with our language and our delivery when we're talking about inclusivity? That's just as important as the content. Like, are we delivering to the audience and including everyone? I'm a member of the chronically ill community, and while it is not one of the more known cultures, it's still a life that requires certain actions to stay well. I've grown up with people looking at me odd because I have to do certain things in order to learn or experience things. Yes, Katie. Look at everything that you're sharing here. There's some intentionality that is required behind learning design. And so we have a responsibility as learning practitioners and professionals to uncover some of those cultural defaults, right? Where do cultural defaults exist in our learning materials? What could be found in the learning experiences that we create? If we actually look far enough, you can actually gain some examples from what your peers are sharing in the chat right now. Copy and paste some of this stuff. This is gold because this is coming from you. And guess what? You're not just learning professionals, you're also learners. So you're sharing what it is to be a learner, to be in the audience, to be in that space of feeling not included, not considered, uh, and really, at the end of the day, not part of the global learning experience. So, at first glance, let's talk about some default perspectives, some of which I must admit were some of my own. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and throw that out there and put myself out there, everybody. Okay, this is a safe space, right? I'm hoping so because you're sharing some really cool and intimate things with us right now. Here's some default perspectives that I want to talk about that I discovered in my space, but also just in doing research for this session. Assuming everyone has high-speed internet, modern devices, or is comfortable with digital learning. In the space of Zoom and virtual learning, virtual training, we assume that everybody already knows how to do the thing, how to use the thing, how to operate in the virtual world. So at first, when Zoom was introduced, we had an intro. Okay, below on your screen, you'll see a chat button. You'll also see an icon for reactions. And we give an intro to level set understanding, but also level set knowledge and how to use digital tools. We kind of weaned off of it a bit. I mean, I kind of did it walking in this space, assuming that you all are here in this virtual space and you know how to use. I'm like, yeah, emojis, use them. But that's an assumption that we make is that everybody has that same level of technical knowledge. And so that's a default perspective. Another is centering Western holidays instead of acknowledging global observances. Like, not everybody celebrates Christmas, and it's not all in December, right? December 25th is not the default holiday for everyone in Christmas. That might not be the case everywhere else. So that's just an example. I won't harp on that one too much because holidays, we are kind of lucky in the fact that many of our calendar tools already have a setting where we can default and include holidays that are not westernized. So that's a great setting to add to your Outlook if you have not already, right? Um, but how about some other things that you shared in the chat? And I'm going right to this sticky note right here. If you can see my blue dot or arrow, focusing only on race, language, or gender, but overlooking accessibility for neurodiverse or disabled learners. Or how about even age? We talked about that earlier, right? Whenever we hear inclusive, we default to the more commonly discussed areas of inclusivity. And so this is a default perspective that we can learn to broaden a bit. Treating broad regions, and I'm going to the left sticky note right here, as monolithic. And we're going to talk about some regional demographics very soon because this is where I had some area of opportunity because I would walk into a virtual space and be like, hey, good morning, everyone. And many of you could actually be on a whole different time zone from me. And so I had to learn that, like asking the question first, not making assumptions, and ask people, where are you calling from? Right? Where are you logging in from? What is your time zone? Is it morning? Are you drinking coffee? Are you drinking, a night cap? What does that look like? Believing that adding diverse faces, and I'm in this sticky note right here, or names automatically creates inclusion. And I think Pankaj was talking about that earlier, that performative version of inclusion where you're like, oh, let me make sure that I have some diverse faces in here, or that the names are culturally inclusive. The next sticky note I have here is not recognizing cultures where challenging authority or group consensus is discouraged. Speaking up, especially without giving permission, is not a universal thing. So, an example, I led a webinar the other day, and I was asking everyone to raise their virtual hand. It happened to be the Asia Pacific region. Unbeknownst to me, in their culture, they have to ask the leader permission to contribute to a conversation in that way, especially in a meeting. And even then, for that particular region, they're supposed to funnel their questions to their leader and their leader asks on their behalf. Well, I didn't know this. So I was like, anybody? No one? No one has any questions? What? And I just felt like, man, I'm not hitting the mark here. I'm missing out and maybe they're not as engaged as I thought that they were, but that was not the case. You know, them raising their hand was considering challenging authority in that particular region. So that was interesting for me, and that was a learning moment. And so that goes to my very last sticky note right here. Assuming engagement looks the same everywhere. Believing like an active chat or webcam participation or even verbal feedback equals engagement. Some people like to listen and process. Others like to take notes and say, you know what? This is a good point for me to make. And they may take those notes and process them later and do some self-reflection. So Benita's in the chat and says, perhaps that's why I didn't get much chat participation from my team in India. That could very well be. And so, Benita, a great thing that I've been doing is tapping into my SME resources, my subject matter experts in that region. If you have a contact person that you can reach out to prior to your session, where you can really lean in on curiosity and ask that subject matter expert or even that regional expert. They don't even have to be a subject matter expert. They could just be a peer in that region that can share some of their own cultural norms, some of the do's and don'ts, faux pas, you know, that would be beautiful for your preparation for your sessions, especially on a global setting, right? Finding out before the session about these cultural norms, what works, what does not work, what is applicable to this audience, what hand gestures may actually be offensive. True story. Um, I worked at Disney. Not sure if you can tell. I'm a Disney girl. And that was my first stint. I was 19 years old. It was an internship. And that was my first exposure to what inclusivity was before it was a thing, right? I'd like to say a thing. And before it was a popular subject. And part of our training was learning how to keep our hands folded or at our sides. And that was because some hand gestures were considered offensive in certain cultures. And so our guests at Disney come from all walks of life. And as you know, from all over the world. And we will never know where our guests are from unless we engage with them. So we don't make assumptions. We just keep a neutral stance and we make sure when we're pointing to the bathroom, we point with two fingers or our whole hand and not one finger because that was considered offensive. And that was eye-opening for me, how culturally aware Disney was and how they prepared us to welcome our guests on the Disney pavement and make sure that they felt welcome regardless of where they were coming from. Beautiful thing. So, speaking of global audiences and global guests, what are regional demographics? In global business and learning, the world is often divided into specific regions, either for management, training, reporting, or just overall operations. And so, as I told you, I'm currently consulting with a global company, and they started to throw all this jargon, all this acronyms for these regional demographics. And I was lost. Your girl was lost. Okay. I was like, APAC, what is APAC? Well, I learned that APAC stood for Asia Pacific. And Asia Pacific were common countries as you see on the screen. East Asia, what did I say Asia? I meant Asia, which included China, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and Hong Kong. Southeast Asia, which was Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Vietnam. South Asia, which was India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka, and then Oceania, which was Australia and New Zealand. Whoa, culture shock for me. I didn't know all of these countries were under the umbrella of APAC. And so I had to learn to watch for language, religion, tech access, which was different in each of these regions, by the way, because technology in China and is so far advanced than in other parts of Asia Pacific. So you would think because they fall under the same region, um, that they have, Asia Pacific, China. Sorry. Thank you for asking. The question was, what does the C stand for here? And that's China. That got left off somehow. Thank you for asking that question. Um, I think so. And let me look that up just to make sure, because I don't want to steer you wrong. Because now I feel like, is that a typo? Pacific. Thank you. PAC, Pacific. Appreciate it, Clem. I knew I didn't. Yes. So Asia Pacific, the PAC, there's clarity for Jocelyn's question of what the C stands for. Appreciate it. I said China, stand corrected. Okay. But what I had to watch for was there wasn't a collective decision-making umbrella for APAC. Okay. They all operate differently, even within the region. And so I had to have those practice conversations or practice runs before doing a session, or those conversations of what are your cultural norms, what are your tech accesses, you know, is what does engagement mean for you all? And what are the distinctions between your regions when it comes to the services and the products that we provide in your region as well? So within the organization, not all products are launched in all regions at the same time. So that was also part of my questioning. All right. And then there was EAME. Now we call it EAME, but when you look it up online, it's EMEA, which is Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And it's all the countries that you see listed here: Western Europe, Eastern Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And as you know, in Western Europe alone, these are all different languages. But what's really cool is that I ran into people and learners in the UK who also spoke French and also spoke Spanish. But I assume they didn't. I assume they only spoke English. But in Western Europe, there's a lot of cross-pollinating between languages, which is so beautiful. Um, and Thank you, Kim. Um, and so I needed to learn some of the cultural nuances within Western Europe that might be different from Eastern Europe. And so languages vary widely in EMEA. English is not the standard, but many of them do speak English, which is very helpful, right? Because you can start the conversation that way. But their cultural norms vary within those subregions, especially when it comes to faith, holidays. And let me tell you, some of them have the 4-day week. Can we please have a 4-day week? Thank you. Friday and Saturday weekends are very different than what we have here. So, another regional demographic. This one's a little bit more common, which is LATAM. Most of the organizations I've worked for, they use the term LATAM, which stands for Latin America. And that includes Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, Chile, Peru, Venezuela, Costa Rica, and some more. And so the common languages in LATAM are Spanish and Portuguese. And I've also noticed many in the region speak both languages, but you never know. This is not something to assume, right? But humor and informalities definitely differ here. And you may find that family and community are more central than business. And using familial examples in your images or even in your scenarios are very welcoming because they can relate to that. But again, don't want to assume that. You want to ask ahead of time. And then last but not least, NA, which is North America, mostly includes the United States and Canada, but sometimes it also includes Mexico. So that's why LATAM, it says Latin America, but it also could include North America. And so there's a lot of individualism here. Informality is a lot more common. And although English is a dominant language, some also speak French, especially in the Canadian provinces, and we don't want to assume, right? So a question is coming in the chat. Do you suggest changing presentation styles for different cultures? Um, Maybe not necessarily presentation styles, perhaps having a more general non-image heavy presentation, I would say, Bonita. If you notice this particular presentation, it's investigative, right? So there's not a lot of people in here, and the images are more suggested. Like if you see the magnifying glass, you're assuming a detective or you're zooming in, right? That's not culturally influenced. So if you don't want to have multiple presentations, Bonita, for different audiences, perhaps finding something that's more universal versus neutral will help you in minimizing all the different types of presentations that you may have. But that conversation may be steered by your country liaison or your regional representative that may be able to share that with you and say, you know what, you can keep your presentation this way, but if you change this image, it'll really hit home for this audience. And you don't have to change the entire presentation, just certain images. Great question. Thank you. And keep the questions coming. I welcome them. So, what are some of the benefits of tapping into your CQ? Cultural intelligence is great for businesses across the board, especially when you're looking to outperform your competitors in innovation and global growth. So, if you want to create impact at every level, oh gosh, this doesn't include some of these things. I was supposed to take these parts out. So we're just going to focus on the yellow parts where it says reduce risk, save time, increase impact, and not non-performative inclusion. So I apologize for the images not being updated there or the lettering. It's in Latin. But yeah, reducing risk, saving time, increasing impact, and not having performative inclusion. This is really important. Thank you, Brittany. Maybe the Latin part is inclusive. How about we put it that way? I should have just played it off like it was intentional, but um, but reducing the risk, right, is really important because there are legal risks when you don't tap into some of your cultural intelligence, especially when it comes to compliance. If you are in a heavily regulated industry or a compliant-driven industry, there are some legal risks to not being culturally inclusive and investigating what are the laws that we must adhere to when it comes to certain cultural norms, especially work days, etc. So you want to reduce that legal risk by being investigative in your learning practices. Um, Katie, you might have to translate for us, Katie. Come on now. Saving time. So Brittany had the question earlier of do you or should you have multiple presentations that you create? Well, you can save time when you take the investigative approach and you create a presentation that's general enough where you just have to change certain images, or you can have something that's content heavy, and I mean that by saying there are certain translation tools that will translate all of the content in the relevant language. Now, it's important to know that you need someone that is fluent in the language to cross examine some of the translations if you do use these translation tools because they take the content and translate them literally. Okay. So, for example, Caterpillar is one of my clients, right? So we abbreviate cat. So when we translate cat, it literally says cat as the animal or the pet in that language. So you definitely want to have a proofreader when translating content to save time, but also make sure that you don't derail your audiences, right? And yes, tapping into human intelligence for translation and not just AI. But using content heavy material is a lot more helpful when using translation tools to be relevant to that country or region. Most translation tools do not translate images. So if you have an image heavy presentation, then that's going to be challenging if because not only does it have to be culturally relevant, but it will not be translated if there's words on these images. Okay. So just a couple of tips on and benefits of cultural intelligence. Now, steering away from the Latin slide and getting back into my native tongue and language, become the investigator and the advocate. Okay. Um, because we're all in this space that Lewis has created for us to discuss this, we're equipping ourselves with a lot more knowledge about cultural intelligence. And so I encourage all of us to not only become the investigator when creating these learning tools, but also to speak up and speak up about how it connects to the business and how the business can not only benefit from it, but also see some clear outcomes from making this adjustment, right? So CQ is just not about doing the right thing. It actually drives results. You know, organizations experience better engagement. They experience fewer compliance issues, and they actually establish a much stronger global presence. You know, when you think about international brands like Coca-Cola and McDonald's, you'll see that the menu at McDonald's is different in different regions. You're like, wait a minute, they don't sell fajitas where I'm from. Like, they made that adjustment. They sell tacos at McDonald's. They don't sell tacos where I'm at. They make adjustments based on the region. That's to increase their stronger global presence. Even Coca-Cola, they make sure that they have a different, actors and cultural references in their marketing and commercials. So this is not a new concept. When people see themselves in learning, or when they see themselves, period, they just show up differently. And the impact is a lot different because now I feel like you see me, you can relate to me, you are considering me, and you know that I'm part of your audience. And so now I am developing a sense of loyalty and commitment to you and your business and your results. And it's part of how that cycle and that relationship builds between the organization, the people that represent the organization, as well as the recipients, like our learners. Caitlin said in the chat, I do something like what Kim is describing. I will always point out activities that could benefit from localization, where the names or examples could be adjusted to the local norms. I love that. And that could be something as simple as like scenarios when you're using businesses, right? So I appreciate that. Now, I also want to hear from you. What cultural clues have you found now that I've kind of broadened and talked about different pieces that we can investigate, right? I invite you to share some things that you didn't notice were not culturally inclusive, but now you're like, something to think about. And I'm giving everybody a moment to type here. Recognizing that engagement will look differently for different people, especially in a digital context. That was shared by Bridget Manley. That was something that was extremely new for me because I thrive off of engagement. When I started as a learning professional and as a facilitator, it was very much in person. A lot of what I did was not virtual. It was very much instructor-led training always. And so I thrived off of the energy of the audience and the learners and them raising their hands. And I would try to read nonverbal cues, such as people taking notes and such. And so that was my firsthand experience of what engagement looked like. But that varies. So, and I started to learn that more and more as my audience became more globalized and more diverse. So thank you for pointing that out, Bridget. Absolutely. Caitlin says, as soon as I went abroad for the first time, I realized how many baseball related expressions we used in the US. She knocked it out of the park. That was a real home run. Yes, sports analogies are very popular and common because we think that they are also global and universal. And the fact is that different sports have a different level of impact in different parts of the region. And some of them even have a different name, like we call soccer soccer, but in Europe, it's widely known as football. So that in itself, if we made like a football reference, would not be, it would be kind of confusing if we didn't have images and we were just using the example. So I love that you brought in the sports aspect of it, Caitlin, because that is super relevant. Catherine says assumptions that everyone in the audience speaks English as their first language. Um, yes, and I think language is extremely nuanced at this point. We are so globalized. And I think one thing that I noticed from traveling is that the US is a space where English is dominant, but other languages are not necessarily promoted to learn. It's always like an addition to, right? Or you have to go to a dual language school that, promotes dual language, or you have to wait till high school till you pick a language. Whereas in other parts of the world, learning a second and third language is part of the curriculum, period. And so, knowing that, yes, English is a dominant language and many people learn it, it's not the only. So, Catherine, thank you for pointing that out. I personally speak three languages. I'm working on a fourth. Linguistics have always been a love of mine. My father personally learned and spoke seven languages fluently, and I got to see him kind of flip the switch and flip his dialect depending on who he was talking to, and that was fascinating to me because it was just a different level of inclusivity that I got exposed to at a very early age that I felt was really important, but not necessarily promoted in my schooling. Um, Image is not only the people, but what they're doing, where they're standing, what they're wearing. Oh gosh, so let's talk about what Brittany just shared of what they're wearing, right? Um, that can be either offensive, maybe too exposing, or just misleading. So we have to know our audience. We have to know our audience, not only the languages they speak or the technology that they have access to, but what is considered appropriate when it comes to um, what they're wearing, you know? Do we have to acknowledge and put in images where someone is wearing a hijab or, or is fully clothed because that's considered more respectful? So, what someone is wearing is a beautiful call out, Brittany. Thank you so much. Charlotte, the hierarchy focused differences between regions. I get stuck in my own perspective, and some scenarios would need changes that are more collective focused. Yeah, so hierarchy is very important. There are some organizations that definitely have a few layers of approval needed, and even the conversation is different, not just approvals, but engagement. So thank you for pointing out hierarchy, Charlotte. That's a great call out. I also love how you can have a theme that is inclusive too, your magnifying glasses and investigative theme. I use the theme of investigation here because I don't want us to be so hard on ourselves about what we don't know. Many of our experiences are based on our exposure or lack thereof, right? So, this is by no means to say, hey, you're not inclusive or you have not done enough research. No, this is really for you to change your mindset to have a more investigative mindset as you're going into create training material. So be kind to yourself, right? Be kind about what you don't know and just be curious. That's what I like to say. Because I shared with you my vulnerability at the beginning of the session of, wow, I didn't know how much I didn't know. And you don't know what you don't know. So sometimes it's not until you've stumbled and tripped over your own laces that you realize there's still so much to learn. And it took for me to go into a space that was a lot more globalized and had the global mindset to learn those things. So, yes, theming is very important to me to hit messages, but also to um, bring it home in a way that's l- a lot more level, right, for everyone. Caitlin says, what's coming up for me is that we often try to add in references that we think are engaging to a specific portion of our audience without accounting for the reality that not everyone will understand and resonate with those references. I'd like to hear more about that. Um, and so we have about 15 minutes left. So I'm going to read the rest of these and then wrap up with us because I love what you're sharing and I don't want anyone to miss it. So Kim shares, my digest CQ adaptation is between an executive audience and frontline workers. I am definitely going to rewatch this session. So many points that don't come up often, but are important. Thank you. And executive audience and frontline workers, let's talk about that real quick. So, one thing that I learned about the executive audience is how concise they like for us to be. Diving into the details and really over describing certain notes, not a fan. They like you to be concise, quick, and to the point, maybe some graphs, definitely want to include some numbers, but that's for an executive audience. But if we add that extra layer to the executive audience of what region are they in, how much does that change? So there are certain regions who are like, I want you to give me the specific percentages and sales variance and all that, and they want data, right? So region is still very important regardless of hierarchy. But wow, Kim, that's such a beautiful call out of knowing the difference of the executive audience versus frontline workers. Frontline workers, what I have learned, because I have done a lot of trainings in manufacturing spaces, is that they want to know why. I don't want to just know that you're changing something. I want to know why, and I want to know how it impacts not just the business, but how it impacts me and how I do my work and how it changes my day to day. And why you didn't include me in that decision, or at least ask someone that looked like me or that does the work. So, why is so important to the frontline workers? So, you can include all the cool imagery, make a very captivating training experience for them. But if you don't tell them what's in it for them and why they're there and why the change was made, they're clocked out. Okay. And so, believe it or not, that is part of cultural intelligence. Is tapping into what your audience absolutely needs to know and what they want to know, or they're just going to walk away totally disengaged and more than likely not going to implement the changes that you have just shared with them. Yes, Sandy says you have to tell them why they should care. Absolutely. Catherine shared what higher ed audiences value in communications versus corporate execs. Huge difference. Um, Interesting that you said that because that's something else that I'm learning as a learning professional. Taking the investigative approach is we tend to use language in the learning industry that is only relevant to us, but we think is common. So, for example, we were creating a training for a group of dealers, and we started using words like asynchronous and synchronous. Mm, that is our language. They're not going to know what that means. Uh, so, academia would probably have appreciated asynchronous and synchronous language, right? But it was just not very relevant to that audience. So we had to bring it home and be like, what, how do they speak with each other? What do their peer-to-peer interactions look like? What are some common terminology or phrases that's relevant to them where they're like, you know what? That sounds more like what happens on the field with us. You need to tap into that language as well. So when we say language, we're not just talking about como ça va, como se dice, right? We're not talking about just those languages. We're also talking about the language of the worker and how they interact with one another. So I love that you pointed that out in higher education, et cetera. So being both culturally and emotionally intelligent is just as important as academic intelligence, right? Ah, you guys are so cool. I don't even see you, and I appreciate everything that you shared today. So, my question for you before we leave to close out our investigative practices here, um, do you feel like you're now able to recognize some hidden cultural defaults? You could give me some thumbs up. You could say yes. Describe do you feel like you're able to describe what CQ is? Apply an investigative mindset and lean on some curiosity about your audience. Oh, there's so many more to learn. I know Lewis told me I only had about 45 minutes to an hour, so I had to keep it short for you all. Very cool. If you can say yes to all of these, I am really, really feeling super fulfilled, and I'm glad. Um, what is one commitment you think that you can make? Do you feel, I saw someone said that they were going to come back and watch this. You're taking notes. Guess what I have for you? I have a document with all of these notes. How about that? I'm going to see if I can put it in the chat for you. It's a little cheat sheet, everybody. And guess what it also has? It has some very helpful resources for stock photos. Um, and they're free stock photos that are a lot more culturally inclusive. So let me grab that for you. I hope, oh, yes, you're going to have a takeaway. And gosh, here, I'm gonna put my website on here just in case the attachment doesn't work for me. Um, but I'm gonna try to attach it to the chat. But that's all I have for you guys. That's it. Like after this takeaway with all these fun tools, I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for lending me the space, having fun with me, sharing your thoughts, being vulnerable, hanging out, and learning with me and learning alongside me. I'm trying to find this. Let me see. Is it in
That
my
was wonderful, and we only just scratched the surface. And I just want to say I'm so happy Lewis asked me to host today of all the days because it was just so great to be here. So thank you so much for that. Lots of thank you coming through in the chat. Fantastic. And yeah, so much to consider and having to come back so that for deeper reflection, I think makes sense in watching the video. So thank you.
Of course, it's not allowing me to upload from my computer, only
Do you want to
SharePoint.
pass it through to me through the
I will
Slack
pass
and then I can
it.
just drop it in? Okay.
Absolutely. I will do that.
All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Pull it up right now. I think if we did it, we could probably get it in before we
Oh,
disconnect.
cool. Okay, then
What do
let's
you
do
think?
that. Let me stop sharing and I'm going to go through my
I mean, might
Slack.
as well if we're here, right? We got some
I
time.
totally agree. While everyone is still in the room and we still
If you
have,
wait just another 30 seconds to a minute, we're going to give you that link, right? I think we're going to try.
okay, so here's the Slack TLDC
Thank you
and
so
then
much, everyone. This was great. Thank you from Charlene.
you start.
Charlotte, thank you so much. Following you on LinkedIn. Great content. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. All capitals from Katie. Thanks for being here today. Please come back. Awesome.
Awesome.
Thank you.
I
Thank
found a
you.
way to get you the document, and I'm
Well,
attaching it right now in
all
the Slack.
right. Awesome. Hey,
There you go.
Kaylin. All right, here it goes. I think if I download this and then I drop it in, I think we can do this. And if not, then let's see. Let's see what happens. Oh, it's not letting me do a document. Is that what's happening?
Yeah, that's the problem. It's not letting me attach a document.
Oh, you know what? Yeah, okay. So I think if we want to troubleshoot this really quickly, we'd have to add it to something and create a link and then reshare. So maybe we can ask Lewis or someone to help us get it out to everybody after. Yeah?
Sounds good.
All
Thank you so
right.
much. Appreciate it.
Okay. Have a great day, everyone.
You too.